You step outside alone for a second, lighter clicking once twice, then a small orange glow. Smoke curls upward. You breathe it in, and for a moment your whole body settles. It feels modern. A coffee break habit, a stress reliever, something packaged and sold to you within the last few centuries. But the real answer is far stranger. That curl of smoke rising past your face connects you to something almost as old as fire itself. Long before there were cigarettes, before there was tobacco farming, before there were even permanent villages, your ancestors were already doing this. Not for fun, not for fashion, for something deeper, something written into the way your brain reacts to smoke even now. In 2021, archaeologist Darren Duke and his team were digging at a site in the Great Salt Lake Desert of Utah called Wishbone. They were not looking for tobacco. They were mapping an ancient hunting camp, one used by people chasing waterfowl across a marsh that has long since dried into desert. What they found near a fire pit rewrote the timeline of human habit: charred tobacco seeds. 4 of them, burned and preserved beside the remains of roasted ducks. Radiocarbon dating placed the camp at roughly 12,300 years old. That is not just old. That is older than farming, older than pottery, older than the wheel. It predates the earliest known agriculture by thousands of years. Which means humans were inhaling tobacco smoke while parts of the world still had woolly mammoths walking through them. Why would a hunter-gatherer with no concept of cigarettes or stress breaks choose to burn a bitter, mildly toxic plant and breathe in the result? The answer is not as simple as pleasure. Tobacco, in its raw form, is harsh. Nicotine is a natural insecticide evolved by the plant to poison anything that tries to eat it. Your ancestors were not biting into sweet fruit. They were lighting something the plant never wanted them to consume. And they kept doing it generation after generation until the habit had spread across nearly every continent on Earth. So what were they actually doing to themselves? Evolutionary anthropologists Edward Hagen and Roger Sullivan have spent years studying this exact question, and their research points somewhere unexpected. Their self-medication hypothesis suggests that many of the first psychoactive plants humans used, tobacco among them, were not chosen for pleasure at all. They were chosen because their toxins killed internal parasites. A body riddled with intestinal worms, living in a world without antibiotics or antiparasitics, had every reason to seek out a plant compound strong enough to poison something living inside it. Smoke was simply the fastest delivery system available. Inhaled compounds reached the bloodstream in seconds, far quicker than anything eaten or chewed. So the first smoke breaks in human history may not have been about relaxation at all. They may have been ancient medicine, disguised as ritual. And tobacco was not the only plant chosen for this purpose. Half a world away in the Pamir Mountains of western China, a very different kind of smoke was rising from a very different kind of fire. In 2019, a research team led by archaeologist Yimin Yang examined wooden braziers recovered from the Jerzanko Cemetery, a burial site roughly 2,500 years old. Using gas chromatography, they tested the burned residue left behind in the bowls. The chemical signature was unmistakable. Cannabis, and not just any cannabis. A strain selectively burned for an unusually high level of psychoactive compound, far higher than what would have grown wild in the region. This was not casual use. The braziers were found inside tombs, arranged with care, clearly tied to funeral ritual. Smoke in this context was not medicine. It was message. A way of marking the boundary between the world of the living and whatever the mourners believed came after it. 2 cultures, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, both arrived at the same conclusion. Burn the plant, breathe the smoke. Something changes. But here is where the story gets older still. Primatologist Richard Wrangham has argued that the control of fire, beginning with Homo erectus more than 1 million years ago, was one of the most transformative events in human evolution. Cooking softened food, freed up energy once spent on digestion, and may have helped fuel the growth of larger brains. Fire control came with something else built in, though. Smoke. Constant, daily unavoidable smoke, drifting through caves and campsites for hundreds of thousands of years before anyone deliberately lit a tobacco leaf or a handful of cannabis. In a real sense, the human body was already adapted to tolerate inhaled smoke long before smoke became a choice. So when someone somewhere eventually decided to add a specific plant to that fire, the body already knew what to do with it. The pathway was not invented, it was repurposed. You might assume this idea spread outward from a single clever group who discovered it first, then carried it across the planet. The evidence suggests something closer to convergent evolution instead. Anthropologist Johannes Wilbert spent decades studying the Waro people of the Orinoco Delta in South America, documenting a tradition of tobacco shamanism so intricate that entire origin myths were built around the act of inhaling smoke to cross into the spirit world. Independently, hunter-gatherers in North America were doing it with tobacco. Mourners in Central Asia were doing it with cannabis. Other cultures, isolated by oceans and mountain ranges, reached for wormwood, sage, coca leaves, and dozens of other plants known to alter the mind, almost always delivered the same way, burned and inhaled. Why smoke specifically? Why not just eat the plant? Because smoke bypasses digestion entirely. It crosses into the bloodstream through the lungs almost instantly, reaching the brain in a fraction of the time that swallowing ever could. For a species without syringes, without pills, without any concept of modern pharmacology, smoke was the original fast-acting delivery system. Your ancestors did not understand pharmacokinetics, but their bodies understood the difference between slow and fast, and across continents, independently, they kept choosing fast. Here is the twist that should make you pause. The same trait that made smoke so useful 12,000 years ago is the trait that makes it so dangerous now. Researchers studying evolutionary mismatch describe a simple but unsettling pattern. A behavior that was rare, occasional, and tied to ritual or medicine in the ancestral environment becomes something else entirely once it is made cheap, constant, and concentrated. Your ancestors were not lighting a tobacco leaf every few hours, every single day for decades. They were doing it occasionally, in specific ritual contexts, often under the guidance of an elder or healer who understood the dose. Modern tobacco, refined, mass-produced, engineered for maximum nicotine delivery, offers none of those natural limits. The ancient reward pathway is the same one your brain still carries. The frequency and concentration around it are not. This is where the ancient story folds back into your own life. Nicotine, the same compound preserved in those 12,000-year-old charred seeds, is one of the most addictive substances known to modern science. Precisely because it exploits a reward pathway that predates agriculture, predates language, predates almost everything you would call civilization. When someone today says they need a cigarette to get through a hard moment, they are echoing a behavior that may stretch back to a marsh in what is now Utah, where someone exhausted from hunting birds sat beside a fire and breathed in something that made the world feel briefly more bearable. The ritual has changed. The wrapping has changed. The marketing, the packaging, the social meaning, all of it has changed almost beyond recognition. But the basic act, burn something, breathe the smoke, feel something shift inside you, is one of the oldest continuous behaviors your species has ever kept. It outlasted the mammoths. It outlasted the empires that first taxed and traded it. It is, in some form, still happening right now, in cities your ancestors could never have imagined. So the next time you see a curl of smoke rising into the air, from a cigarette, a campfire, an incense stick in a quiet room, you are not watching something new. You are watching one of the oldest habits your species has ever kept, one your ancestors started not because it felt modern, but because, in a world before medicine had a name, smoke was simply the fastest way they knew to change what was happening inside their own bodies. That orange glow in the dark connects you to a fire that, in one form or another, has never quite gone out.